The soles of my worn-out sneakers squeaked faintly on the hospital's freshly polished floor, each step a steady rhythm that mirrored the beat of my own heart, a metronome of devotion. My name is Eleanor, a 66-year-old nurse with silver hair neatly pinned into a bun. The years of service I've given to this place are written in the laughter lines around my eyes. Beneath the crisp uniform, I carried a quiet yearning, a wish for something beyond the antiseptic scent of these halls and the hum of fluorescent lights. The door to room 305 was ajar, offering a glimpse of the patient inside. A young man sat on the edge of the bed, his posture tense, like a bird ready to flee at the first sign of danger. His sandy hair, tousled and unkempt, reminded me of the wheat fields back home in Kansas, and his bright blue eyes were locked on the foredrip, tracing its path like a winding stream. "Good morning," I greeted him softly, my voice warm but measured like my practiced smile. "I'm Eleanor, your nurse." He lifted his gaze, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a spark, a small but powerful jolt that transported me back to simpler days. County fairs, laughter, and stolen kisses beneath the Ferris wheel. He was striking, his light beard framing a strong jawline. Even beneath the standard hospital gown, you could tell he had the kind of build that spoke of resilience and activity. Faint tattoos peeked out from his sleeve, teasing at stories he hadn't yet shared. "Morning," he replied, shifting slightly on the bed. A wince of pain flickered across his face, but quickly disappeared. "I'm Caleb," he added, his tone friendly despite the discomfort. Caleb had undergone an appendectomy the previous day, and now he was my patient, entrusted to my care. I stepped closer to check his vitals, asking, "How are you feeling today, Caleb?" "Sore but okay," he said with a small, shy smile. That smile made my heart flutter, catching me off guard. I returned it instinctively, suppressing the quiet longing I hadn't acknowledged in years. "You're not from around here, are you?" I asked, noting the absence of a southern twang in his voice. He chuckled, a soft melodic sound that warmed the sterile room. "No, ma'am. Midwest, born and raised in Illinois. I'm just passing through on a road trip." Over the next few days I looked after Caleb. I helped him walk the halls, brought his meals, and ensured he was as comfortable as he could be. Despite my best efforts to maintain professional boundaries, it became harder to ignore the way his laughter brightened the room, or how his voice carried the easy charm of someone who truly loved life. Caleb was an engineer by trade, a problem solver who had left his corporate job to embark on a journey of self-discovery. "I wanted to see the country, meet real people," he explained one day, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "I wanted to find something more, you know?" I nodded, feeling a bittersweet pang of understanding. Once I dreamed of adventure too, of escaping the predictable life I'd settled into. But over time, those dreams had been quietly buried beneath my obligations and routines. On his final day, I mustered the courage to ask for his phone number. I told myself it was purely for follow-up care, but deep down I knew better. I wanted to keep a piece of this connection, this glimpse of something I hadn't felt in a long time. "I'd like to check in on you," I said, my voice carefully casual as I helped him pack his bag. "Make sure you're recovering well." His eyes met mine, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. Then he smiled, a smile that made my heart skip. "Sure," he said, reciting his number. I typed it into my phone, feeling an unfamiliar thrill as I saved it. Days later, my hands trembled slightly as I dialed his number, my pulse quickening with each ring. "Hi, Caleb," I said when he answered, trying to steady my voice. "It's Eleanor, your nurse from the hospital," I clarified, trying to sound more assured than I felt. "I was wondering, would you like to grab a coffee sometime?" There was a pause, long enough for doubt to creep in, but then he agreed. Relief and excitement surged through me, and I couldn't help but smile. We met at a small downtown cafe, where the late afternoon sun bathed the room in a golden glow. The light softened the edges of everything, including Caleb, whose rugged handsomeness seemed even more striking in this setting. I'd spent far too long fretting over what to wear, eventually settling on an outfit that hinted at a touch of confidence. It felt like a nod to a version of me I hadn't seen in years. Over steaming cups of coffee, I tried to bridge the gap between us. I leaned in closer than necessary, laughed a little too enthusiastically at his jokes, and hung on his every word. But Caleb, with the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen life's ebbs and flows, remained polite but distant. "How have you been holding up?" I asked, taking a sip of the strong brew, its warmth grounding me in the moment. "Much better," he replied with a smile that could disarm anyone. "The scar's still a little tender, but I'm back on my feet. Freelancing engineering gigs I can do from anywhere." "That's fantastic," I said softly, letting my hand graze his on the table. He didn't pull away, but he didn't respond to the touch either. A quiet wave of disappointment rolled over me, but I wasn't ready to give up. Soon it was time to leave. As we walked out, I secretly hoped he might suggest spending more time together. But instead, he simply tipped an imaginary hat, smiled, and said goodbye. We parted ways, and the familiar weight of solitude settled over me once again. Days turned into weeks, and I buried myself in work, hoping to move past the thoughts of Caleb that lingered like a stubborn melody. I swapped shifts, volunteered for extra hours, and kept myself so busy there was barely room to breathe. But no matter how hard I tried, the memory of his smile, his laugh, and his presence remained etched in my mind. Then one day he returned, but this time he wasn't alone. A beautiful woman was by his side. My heart sank at the sight of them together. From behind the nurse's station, I watched them approach, a pang of jealousy twisting in my chest. But when they reached me, Caleb introduced her. "This is my sister Grace," he said. Relief washed over me as quickly as the jealousy had appeared. Grace was dealing with some gastric issues, and Caleb had brought her in for treatment. As I checked Grace's vitals, Caleb lingered near the window, his hands tucked into his pockets. His gaze occasionally flicked toward me, and when I caught his eye he smiled, a faint, almost shy expression that made my heart skip. "She's in good hands," I assured him, adjusting the monitor. "I know," he replied softly, his voice carrying a note of gratitude. "You've always been attentive." The pause in his words made me look up. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, the clinical walls around us faded. The connection between us felt stronger, like an unspoken promise in the air. Throughout Grace's stay, Caleb made excuses to stay close, asking questions about her care, offering to help carry supplies, or simply sitting beside her bed, where we'd exchange quiet conversations while Grace dozed. One evening, as I finished my shift, he stopped me in the hallway. "Thank you for everything, Eleanor," he said, his tone earnest. "Grace has been through a lot, and I've never seen someone so kind to her." I smiled, brushing a strand of silver hair behind my ear. "It's my job," I said, though the warmth in his gaze told me he saw more than just professionalism. Before he left that night, he hesitated in the doorway, as if wanting to say something. When I raised a questioning brow, he shook his head with a chuckle. "Good night, Eleanor," he murmured, his voice lingering in my thoughts long after he was gone. I did my best to ensure Grace was comfortable, remaining professional yet warm, with just enough kindness to let Caleb know I cared. Every gesture, every word, carried a gentleness that came naturally in his presence. I could feel his eyes on me as I worked, and though I tried to focus on Grace, the awareness of him never left. One day Caleb gently pulled me aside. His hand rested on my arm, the warmth of his touch seeping through the fabric of my sleeve. "Thank you, Eleanor," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "You've been so kind to Grace, to both of us." I smiled, my heart fluttering. "It's my job," I replied, though the connection between us felt like something more. The way he looked at me, grateful yes, but with something deeper, made it clear that the spark between us hadn't dimmed. After Grace was discharged, I found the courage to invite Caleb over. "I'd like to check in on you," I said casually, "just to make sure you're doing okay." To my surprise and delight, he accepted. The day of his visit, I threw myself into preparing. I cleaned the house, lit a few candles, and chose an outfit that felt effortlessly comfortable, yet subtly flattering. When he arrived, I greeted him with a slightly shaky hand as I offered him a drink. He took it, his gaze flickering for a brief moment before he looked away. My pulse quickened, a thrill of nervous energy coursing through me. We sat on the sofa, the unspoken tension between us thick, but not uncomfortable. Caleb talked about his work, his travels, and the life he'd left behind before his surgery. I listened intently, hanging on every word, my eyes rarely leaving his. At one point, as I leaned over to grab the remote, I felt his eyes on me. Through the mirror across the room, I caught a glimpse of his expression, a thoughtful look that made my pulse quicken. He seemed lost in thought, his brows furrowed as if wrestling with something he couldn't quite voice. I turned to face him fully, offering a gentle smile. "Is everything okay?" I asked softly, sensing there was more he wanted to say. He hesitated, his eyes darting to the bookshelf, then to me, as if searching for the right words. Yeah, I'm fine," he finally said, though the way his hands gripped his knees betrayed him. I tilted my head, studying him. "You don't have to tell me if you're not ready," I said gently, offering him an out. But deep down, I hoped he'd open up. He sighed, leaning back into the sofa, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. "It's not that I don't want to," he murmured, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "It's just complicated." The weight of his words settled over us, thickening the air. I reached out, resting my hand on his arm. "Complicated doesn't scare me, Caleb," I said quietly. "I've lived through my share of it." His eyes finally met mine, and the raw emotion there took my breath away. "You make me want to try," he admitted, his voice rough, "to figure out what this is between us. But I'm scared I'll mess it up." I smiled, my chest tightening with a mix of hope and affection. "Then let's take it slow," I said. "One step at a time." For a moment he hesitated, his eyes searching mine as though deciding how much to reveal. Then he murmured, "Yeah, everything's fine." But something in his tone, in the way he looked at me, hinted at feelings left unspoken, feelings that mirrored my own. I tilted my head and asked softly, "Is everything okay?" feigning innocence, though his flustered expression betrayed him. He cleared his throat, avoiding my gaze. Yes. Just admiring your collection of books," he stammered, nodding towards the shelf. A knowing smile tugged at my lips. I could tell he wasn't being entirely truthful, but I let it slide. As I moved past him, his presence felt palpable, a subtle closeness that sent a flutter through my chest. He didn't touch me, though, and that restraint, a mix of longing and self-control, only added to the tension building between us. Our conversation carried on effortlessly, laughter bubbling up between us, filling the room with a warmth that rivaled the fading sunlight outside. The day surrendered to dusk, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink, and the charged atmosphere between us was impossible to ignore. Taking a leap of faith, I sat beside him on the couch, the space between us narrowing, charged with unspoken emotion. He inhaled deeply, his eyes searching mine, silently asking for permission. I answered without words, leaning in and pressing my lips to his, softly at first, testing the waters. He responded instantly, his gaze lingered on me, and as he leaned closer, the world seemed to pause. The kiss was tender, carrying a quiet intensity that spoke of everything we hadn't said out loud. When we pulled apart, breathless, we stared at each other, the air thick with emotion. "I've wanted to do that since the first day I saw you," he murmured, his voice rough with honesty. "Me too," I admitted, my cheeks warming. "But I didn't know if it was appropriate." His lips curved into a small smile. "Screw appropriate," he said, capturing my mouth again in another kiss that left me dizzy. The connection between us grew, the moment stretching like an unspoken promise, until a sharp sound broke the stillness, the doorbell. We froze, startled, before Caleb leaned back, his expression laced with a mix of surprise and regret. I laughed softly, standing to straighten my clothes. "Relax. It's probably just my neighbor," I assured him, heading to the door. But when I opened it, I was met with a familiar face, Thomas, my ex-husband. He stood there, his expression unreadable, holding a Tupperware container. His eyes flicked from me to Caleb, taking in the scene with barely disguised curiosity. "Hi, Thomas," I said evenly. "What brings you by?" "Hi, Thomas," I said evenly, surprised to see him standing there with his usual stiff posture and a Tupperware container in hand. "Just thought you might like some cookies," he said, his tone overly casual, though his eyes flicked past me, settling briefly on Caleb. "You've been working hard, and I figured you could use a little something from home." I hesitated before taking the container, my thoughts spiraling back to a time when Thomas's gestures had felt warm, even loving. Now they seemed hollow, like he was grasping for some piece of a connection we'd lost long ago. "Thanks," I said, forcing a polite smile, though the weight of the moment pressed down on me. Thomas and I had shared years of history, a marriage built on routine and quiet companionship. But somewhere along the line, we'd become strangers to each other. When we divorced, I'd told myself it was for the best. Yet now, standing here with his cookies and his lingering glances, I felt the echo of that old loneliness tugging at my heart. "Nice to meet you. I'm Caleb, a friend of Eleanor's," Caleb said, stepping into view behind me with an easy confidence. Thomas's grip was firm as they shook hands, his expression tight. "Likewise," he said curtly before turning back to me. "Call me if you need anything." His words hung in the air, loaded with unspoken meaning, as he turned and walked away. I closed the door with a soft click, my pulse racing as I turned to Caleb. Caleb extended his hand politely. "Nice to meet you. I'm Caleb, a friend of Eleanor's." Thomas's grip was firm as he shook Caleb's hand, his tone stiff. "Likewise." He glanced back at me. "Call me if you need anything," he added before turning to leave. As the door closed, I turned to Caleb, a nervous laugh escaping my lips. "Well, that was unexpected." Caleb smiled faintly but stood. "I should probably go. I don't want to cause any trouble." I placed a hand on his chest, looking up at him. "Don't worry about it," I said softly. "Let's just enjoy the moment." He hesitated, then leaned in, capturing my lips again. And for a while, the rest of the world faded away. The kiss was deeper this time, filled with a promise of something more, a glimpse of a future that felt almost within reach. But the night ended differently than I had hoped. Caleb left with a gentle kiss on my cheek and a whispered, "Next time." Alone in my room, still dressed in my yoga pants and tank top, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan. The memory of his touch and his smile lingered, bittersweet and unshakable. I longed for him with an intensity that felt almost overwhelming. Decades of putting others first had dulled my sense of personal desire. But Caleb had awakened something in me, a yearning for connection, for intimacy, for the kind of passion I hadn't felt in years. I clung to the hope that one day he'd see me not just as a friend or his nurse, but as a woman, someone worthy of his affection. Until then, I would wait, my heart heavy with longing but alive with the possibility of what could be. Even in the quiet of the night, I couldn't help but imagine a future where he would return, and we would finally have our time.